I bought this house 10 years ago because it was the quietest place I'd ever known. It sits on half an acre of cracked, sun-baked Illinois clay, a lonely single-story ranch painted the color of dishwater, with nothing but a drainage ditch and 2 empty lots separating me from the nearest neighbor. Silence was my indulgence. No upstairs footfalls, no shared walls vibrating with bass, only the cicadas outside sawing the summer dusk to ribbons. After a decade, I could tell you, blindfolded, which board in the hallway would creak when the air conditioning kicked on. Every sound had a name, a reason, and a place, until one night in late August when something uninvited found its voice inside my walls. It started as a single thud, gentle as a heartbeat, against the sheetrock behind my headboard. I was dozing off, television glowing blue across the room, when the noise nudged me awake. I waited for the second thud because old houses rarely bark just once, but what came next was a slow, deliberate slide, like a shoe scuffing hardwood, inside the 5 inches of darkness between drywall and studs. I sat up, remote poised to mute the TV, instinctively listening for the neighbor's car door or some drunken stumble on the street. Nothing. Only the static hush of the screen, and beneath it, a faint rustle where no rustle should be. Rational explanations lined up like polite suspects. A mouse dragging insulation, perhaps. A raccoon that squeezed through the attic vent and lost the plot on the way down. Even plumbing can rumble in strange harmonies when humidity shifts. But each idea died the moment I remembered there were no plumbing lines in that wall. No pipes, no vents, not even an outlet. Just lumber, fiberglass, and drywall I had installed myself after rewiring the bedroom 9 years back. I lay there, pulse tapping in my throat until silence closed over everything. Eventually, exhaustion smothered curiosity, and morning arrived with birdsong so ordinary I convinced myself the noise had been the tail end of a dream. For 2 days the house behaved. I worked from my home office corner, an L-shaped desk facing a window of wilting hydrangeas, and the only sounds were keystrokes and the mailman's tires crunching gravel. Then, Wednesday night at 3:17 a.m., a frantic shuffling erupted behind the hallway wall opposite the linen closet. I jolted awake on the couch, heart sprinting, half sure an intruder had broken a window. The hallway lights revealed nothing but beige paint and family photos. Yet the sound persisted, softer now, a low tremor of movement pressed somewhere between paint and 2x4s. I slapped my palm flat against the wall. It felt cool and perfectly still. The shuffling halted as though whatever caused it had sensed my touch. I ripped open the attic hatch and crawled through fiberglass haze with a flashlight, checking joists for paw prints, droppings, any hint of life. Dust motes and the smell of hot wood greeted me. Nothing more. No nesting, no droppings, no scratches on the rafters. The sensible parts of my brain, parts forged by years of spreadsheets and warranties, kept chanting rodent, 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 but the house disagreed in the language of impossible geometry. Footsteps where there was no floor. The following afternoon, while editing invoices, I heard 3 gentle taps behind the drywall by my desk, precisely where my ear would align if I leaned back. Not random knocks, a measured cadence, as if someone practiced Morse but forgot the code. I froze, fingers hovering above the keyboard, eyes locked on the paint as though staring hard enough might let me see through gypsum and timber. The tapping repeated, softer, until it dissolved into a whispered drag like cloth sliding over skin. I jammed my phone's recorder against the spot and held my breath. 19 seconds of silence passed. Then the playback filled my office with an unmistakable exhale. Wet, shaky, undeniably human. Panic is useless without somewhere to point it, so I pointed mine at action. I called Crawford Extermination. Explained there was an animal in my walls, possibly rabid, definitely large. Russ Crawford showed up with steel-toed boots and a grin that suggested ghosts paid overtime. He scanned the exterior, checked the attic, thumped studs with a rubber mallet. "Nothing big enough to make those sounds is living in here," he said, scribbling on a clipboard. Maybe pipes contracting. You'd be surprised how house bones talk after dark. I almost laughed in relief until he added, "Course, houses shouldn't breathe like that." Russ left humane traps in the attic and crawl space, though both of us knew we were humoring me. That night the sounds returned, earlier this time, around 1 a.m. I lay in bed, lights off, phone recording on the nightstand. What drifted through the drywall was not scurrying or scratching, but the unmistakable rhythm of a person shifting weight from one foot to the other. Wood on wood, heel toe, heel toe. The recording captured it perfectly. At the 30-second mark, a tiny voice, sexless, weightless, uttered a syllable so thin it vanished when I replayed it at full volume. But my ears had heard it in real time. Help. Sweat cooled on my skin as the footsteps faded. I lay rigid, watching headlights crawl across the ceiling until dawn smothered the house in pale certainty. Morning always rewrites the night's script, trimming the supernatural into the ordinary. Yet when I re-listened to the recording, the footsteps remained. They were accompanied by soft weeping, quiet enough to dodge casual ears, loud enough that I couldn't blame a faulty mic. That knowledge followed me through breakfast and into the driveway, where I waited for Russ to pick up so I could demand he check again, tear out walls if necessary. He didn't answer. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself exhaustion breeds hallucination. I poured bourbon over ice, sat on the back porch, and listened to cicadas scream their sunset dirge. No tapping, no cries, no phantom footsteps. When I finally eased inside, the house felt dormant, marinated in that hush unique to good insulation. I showered, brushed my teeth, and carried a paperback to bed, determined to read until sleep took me cleanly. The first chapter barely registered before my eyes blurred. As I set the book down, a single deliberate knock echoed behind the headboard, so hard the wooden frame shuddered. I bolted upright. The knock came again, twice, deliberate pauses between. I pressed my ear to the wall. The gypsum chilled my skin, and through it pulsed a heartbeat that was not my own. One heavy thump, then another, as if someone laid their head against the opposite side and matched me breath for breath. My heart hammered. I whispered, "Hello?" because silence had become unbearable. On the far side, breath hitched. Plaster ticked with a secret vibration of vocal cords straining to speak through cotton and studs. Then the faintest sigh trickled into the room, syllables drowned inside it like minnows in mud. A palm thumped once, pleading, deliberate. I stumbled back, spine colliding with the dresser. For several heartbeats, there was only my ragged breathing and the blood roar in my ears. Then the wall went mute, as though satisfied with its demonstration. I wanted to run outside, sleep in the car, anything to escape that impossible proximity, yet moving felt like permission for the sounds to return. So I stood there until my legs trembled, until dawn's first gray washed the curtains and the birds began their usual gossip. The house remained silent, indifferent, but I could not unhear the human desperation nested inches from where I slept. The next evening, I dragged a folding ladder from the garage and climbed to the attic with every intention of cutting a hole in the ceiling to peer down the cavity behind my bedroom wall. But the closer I crawled to that section, the flashlight bobbing over pink insulation and dusty rafters, the more the idea of exposing whatever waited below curdled in my gut. The house hummed with electric quiet, so still it felt staged. A single misplaced breath might collapse the silence and call the footsteps back. I climbed down without cutting a square. Fear had found its footing, and it walked me like a puppet. Friday, 11:58 p.m. I sat on the hallway floor with my back against the wall where the first shuffling had erupted. Phone recorder running, notebook in hand like some amateur ghost hunter. I waited for proof that wouldn't depend on fragile memory. Midnight ticked past. Then, at 12:07, a muted cough sounded inches from my shoulder, followed by a string of wet sniffles that reminded me of a child stifling tears. My pen clattered to the floor. On the recording, the cries were clearer, frightened, exhausted, undeniably human. Hands shaking, I pressed my palm flat against the paint. Muscles shifted on the other side, subtle as a cat turning in tight quarters. My heartbeat hammered so loud I worried it might drown the recording. But then the crying stopped, replaced by a whisper I felt more than heard vibrating through bone and drywall. Please. Just that one word, stretched thin by despair. I yanked my hand back, fingers numb. The wall fell silent again, as if waiting for me to answer. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, not after hearing that. I sat in the hallway until dawn, legs cramping, recorder still clenched in my fist. I replayed the whisper over and over. It was faint, yes, but unmistakable. Please. That voice had not belonged to a rodent, or a raccoon, or a hallucination crafted from stress. It was human. Small, weak, real. By mid-morning, I was tearing through old blueprints of the house in the garage. I found them folded in a dusty filing cabinet I hadn't opened in years. The house was built in 1956. According to the original specs, the walls weren't thick enough for anything, let alone anyone, to hide inside. I traced every line, every stud, every cavity. The crawl space ran beneath the floor, not the walls. The attic was above. There was no room in between, and yet I kept returning to the hallway wall, the same one I'd recorded the crying behind. I stood there with my palm on the paint, half expecting to feel the heartbeat again. Nothing. The house was quiet, almost smug. I called Russ again. No answer. I didn't leave a voicemail this time. By 5 p.m. I'd convinced myself to open the wall. It wasn't courage. It was a sick, gnawing need to prove I wasn't crazy. I grabbed my crowbar, hammer, and utility knife and went to work in the hallway. Every strike of the hammer felt like it echoed through my bones. I peeled back layers of plasterboard, cutting neatly between the studs. Dust and insulation spilled out, yellow, clumped, reeking of old fiberglass, but nothing else. No cavity, no hidden space, just framing and air. But I didn't stop there. I pulled out the insulation, digging deeper until I could see the back of the drywall from the other side, the wall facing my office. That should have been the end of it, except there were smudges on the inside of that drywall. Fingertips, 5 of them, blackened, faint, trailing downward like someone had pressed their hand flat against the inside of the wall and dragged it down slowly. They weren't prints from a worker or builder. No one tapes drywall from the inside. These were too fresh. The smudges looked oily, still tacky when I touched them. And they were low, like a child had left them. I staggered back and nearly slipped on the torn insulation. Suddenly, the silence around me wasn't peaceful. It felt watchful. That night, I moved a mattress into the hallway and slept on the floor, back against the open wall, hammer beside me. I didn't know what I expected. Something to reach out from the void, maybe, or a voice to beg again, but nothing came. No whispers, no sobs, just a silence so absolute it made my ears ring. Saturday morning, I bought 2 more recording devices and a thermal camera. The camera was cheap and slow to respond, but it was enough for a simple test. I scanned the hallway wall first, cold, normal. Then the office wall, nothing. The bedroom, still there. Then I remembered the first knock. The headboard. I scanned the wall behind the bed. For a second, the image flickered, a burst of heat, just a blip, as if someone had pressed their face against the drywall for a moment and then vanished. I scanned again, nothing. I dropped the camera. That night I waited again. 2:46 a.m. The hallway light was off, but the office light behind me cast a sliver of illumination over the baseboards. I sat with my knees to my chest, recorder on, thermal camera aimed at the wall. I watched in silence, and then I heard it, so faint I almost missed it. Breathing. Shallow, hitching, desperate. I raised the thermal cam. The outline of a face bloomed onto the screen. Small, human, cheek pressed sideways to the inside of the wall, eye socket glowing slightly hotter than the rest. The mouth moved, opened, closed. I stared, breath frozen in my chest. Then I heard it, not from the device, but through the wall. A whisper, quivering. "Please let us out. It's so dark in here." The US shattered something inside me. I scrambled backward on the floor, knocking over the camera. The face vanished from the screen before I could recover it. Let us out. Not me. Us. There was more than one. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. The hallway grew colder around 4 a.m., the kind of cold that sinks into your gums and rattles your molars. The wall remained silent after that, but I didn't forget what I'd seen, and I couldn't unhear what they'd said. That morning I drove to the county records office. The clerk was young, maybe 25, but helpful enough. I gave him the house's address and asked for any historical ownership data, renovations, anything unusual. He brought me a few folders, mostly tax records and permit applications. Then halfway through the stack, I found something else. In 1978, a previous owner applied for demolition permits, not for the house, for a detached structure, a shed, one that no longer existed on the property. I flipped through the attached inspection notes. The shed had no foundation, just a pit, 6 feet deep, 12 feet across. No reason listed for demolition, but the permit had been fast-tracked and approved within a single day. I asked the clerk if they had any photographs. He checked the microfiche archive. There was one, a black and white photo of the backyard from the 70s. The shed was small, leaning. The door had no handle. In front of it, half covered by a shadow, sat what looked like a storm drain cover, rusted, bolted shut. It was located near the rear fence. I drove home, shovel in hand. The soil was dry, hard. It took me an hour to clear a wide enough circle near the fence. I found roots, rocks, rusted nails, but no pit, no drain cover. Either it had been moved or buried deeper. I kept digging. 3 feet down, I hit something solid, metal, rectangular. I cleared the dirt away. It was a hatch. I stared at it for a long time, sweat burning my eyes. The metal was heavily rusted, the bolts fused with age, but I could see the outline of a lock, long since broken. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I sat down in the dirt, heart hammering against my ribs, and whispered, "Who are you?" There was no response, but the wall of my house behind me creaked just once, a low, almost relieved sound. I didn't tell anyone about the hatch. I should have, probably. Called the police, a historian, someone who knew how to deal with this kind of thing. But deep down, I knew what would happen if I did. They'd laugh, fill out some paperwork, maybe dig around, but they wouldn't hear what I'd heard. They wouldn't see the face in the wall. It would all get filed under quirky homeownership and forgotten. Besides, something told me this wasn't meant to be opened by just anyone. Still, I wasn't ready to open it myself. Instead, I poured a few gallons of water into the soil to loosen the rust and sat next to it, recorder in hand. I didn't speak, just listened. My breath, the cicadas, the distant hum of an engine somewhere beyond the trees. I stayed there until dusk soaked the sky in red and purple. That's when I heard it again, a whisper, but not from the wall this time. From under the hatch, faint, like someone talking through layers of cloth. "Hello?" The voice was unfamiliar, tired, soft, but this time, older, not the child I'd heard before. I leaned closer, putting my ear near the corroded metal. "Can you hear us?" Us, again. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Then the voice whispered, "How long has it been?" I backed away slowly, the recorder still running, and didn't sleep inside the house that night. I parked my car in the driveway, locked the doors, and sat upright in the driver's seat, flashlight on my lap and eyes fixed on the back fence. I thought about tearing the house down. I thought about burning it. But curiosity is a rot. It starts as a crack and spreads like black mold. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed. The next day I bought tools, a heavy-duty pry bar, bolt cutters, and a crowbar with enough torque to snap through a car door. I waited until nightfall again. I don't know why. Maybe it felt wrong to do it in daylight. At 9:03 p.m., I returned to the pit. The hatch greeted me like an old friend, still rusted, still silent. I cut through the rotted bolts, muscles straining, hands blistering. Every snap of metal made the crickets pause, like they were listening. Finally, the lock gave way with a scream of tearing steel. I waited. Nothing happened. No wind, no smell. Just a quiet that felt heavier than before. I pried the hatch open. Underneath was a narrow tunnel lined with rotted boards descending at an angle into darkness. A cold draft breathed up from it, cooler than the night air, damp with the smell of something buried long ago. I pointed my flashlight down. The tunnel went on for maybe 15 feet before turning sharply left. Earth walls. No signs of wiring or construction, just crude boards, nails bent into soft clay, and old moisture-stained dirt. I should have closed it and walked away. Instead, I climbed down. The boards groaned under my weight, but they held. My flashlight flickered, only once, but I tightened my grip and kept moving. Every step sounded like it echoed too far, like the tunnel stretched longer than it should have. When I reached the corner, I paused. The passage bent left into a low chamber, half collapsed, maybe 6 feet tall at the center. The walls had markings, scratches, handprints, nails driven in erratic patterns, like someone tried to climb out using only desperation. Then my light caught something. A door, wooden, unpainted, child-sized, and behind it, I swear, I heard breathing. I approached slowly. The breathing didn't change. It didn't speed up or pause, just slow, steady inhales. Human. I lifted my hand. Knocked once. The breathing stopped. Then a whisper so close it sounded like it came from the other side of the wood. "Please." I pulled away, hard in my throat. "We've been waiting." My hands shook. The crowbar slipped from my grip and clanged against the dirt. "It's so cold." Then another voice joined it. Younger. Not the same one I'd heard through the wall, but close, familiar. "You can help." I turned and ran. Scrambled up the sloped tunnel, scraping my knees, tearing my palms. The flashlight bounced wildly, casting shadows that danced like limbs. I reached the surface, slammed the hatch shut, and rolled a cinder block over it. Then I sat in the dirt, gasping, until sunrise. I stayed off work for 3 days. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I replayed the recordings over and over again, trying to convince myself it was wind, interference, a neighbor's television bleeding through the soil. But every time, the voices sounded more real, more articulate, like they were learning how to speak clearly again, or remembering. I didn't go near the hatch. I didn't go near the hallway either. But the voices didn't stop. Now they were in the walls again, more frequent, crying, breathing, pleading. Sometimes I'd hear the scrape of fingernails against drywall, or soft knocking, too rhythmic to be random. I tried sleeping with noise-canceling headphones. I tried music. I even ran a box fan in every room. Nothing worked. The house was alive with whispers. Then, one night, I woke to something different. Not crying, not whispers. Laughter, soft, joyless, choked, like a throat that hadn't laughed in years was trying to remember how. And then a single breathy word through the wall above my head. Closer. I ran out of the house barefoot, into the yard, into the night. The house stayed behind me, still and gray, but I could feel it watching. I didn't go back inside until the sun came up. Even then, I only stepped through the back door long enough to grab my wallet, car keys, and a duffel bag. I told myself I'd sleep at a motel for a few days. Just enough time to think things through, maybe find someone who could help, someone who specialized in whatever this was. By 10 a.m., I checked into a rundown roadside inn off the highway. The room smelled like mildew and freezer burn, but it had a bed and a bolted door. No drywall voices, no crawling laughter. I tried to sleep. Tried. But silence is never really silent once your ears have been tuned to something else. I kept waiting for the breathing, for a knock, for the whisper to crawl its way across the bedspread. When nothing came, I felt more disturbed than relieved, like I'd abandoned something I wasn't supposed to. Around midnight, I drove to a diner and drank 3 cups of burnt coffee just to stay awake. That's when I met Harriet. She was maybe late 60s, a waitress with white blonde hair and a tight bun, and an accent I couldn't quite place. We chatted while she refilled my cup for the 3rd time, and I don't know why. Maybe it was the exhaustion, but I asked her if she believed houses could keep things. Her face didn't change, but she leaned her weight on one hip like someone who suddenly didn't want to hear the answer. You mean ghosts? No, not ghosts. People. Her hand froze mid-pour. People that you can't see, I added. People in the walls. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, You from near Oldham Road? That was my street. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She nodded slowly. Used to be another house like that. Not yours, though. Couple blocks down, long time ago. Little blue one with the storm cellar that never opened. I stared at her. What happened to it? She shook her head. Man who lived there. He was a carpenter, built custom doors. Said he kept hearing someone behind his walls asked for one. She poured the rest of the coffee and walked away without another word. When I left the diner, I found a scrap of paper folded under my windshield wiper. One line, written in red ballpoint pen. Don't open the door if they knock back. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I was back at the house. I told myself I'd just check the hatch, see if anything had changed. Make sure it was still shut, still sealed. It wasn't. The cinder block had been pushed aside. The hatch was open, just an inch, barely enough to catch a shadow beneath the lid. I backed away slowly, trying not to breathe. I didn't touch it. I didn't call out. I just walked back into the house and locked every door. But it was different now. The air inside was wrong. Tense, damp. The living room smelled like rotting paper. I stood still in the foyer for a full 5 minutes before I heard it. A knock. 3 soft raps, from the inside of the wall to my left. I turned, trembling. Another knock. Then behind me, from the opposite wall, 3 more. I spun around. Nothing. No movement. No breath. Then both sides knocked at once. Left, right, like they were playing a game. I pressed my back to the front door, tried to steady my breathing. I pulled out my phone, started recording. From upstairs, though my house had no second floor, I heard a faint giggle, not a child's, a woman's, high, dry, and strange. Then, closer, from the hallway wall I'd opened days earlier, came a voice I hadn't heard yet. Let us show you what's behind the door. I stepped toward the hallway, phone shaking in my grip. The voice continued, like it was smiling. We want you to see. You're the only one who ever stayed long enough to hear us. I whispered, Who are you? The wall didn't answer. But down the hall, farther than the hallway should have stretched, I saw a door. A real one. It hadn't been there before. The hallway usually ends in a linen closet. This one kept going now, about 20 feet longer, and at the end, a plain wooden door with no knob, just a keyhole. I should have turned around, run. Instead, I approached. My steps made no sound. The air around the door was cold, not normal cold, but the deep sterile cold of something that hadn't been opened in years. I bent down and looked through the keyhole. At first, darkness, then movement. I saw eyes, dozens of them, some wide, some sunken, all staring directly back at me. I stumbled backward, and that's when they knocked. 3 sharp bangs from the other side of the door, and again, they knew I was there. I ran. Back down the hall, through the kitchen, out the back door. I didn't stop until I was across the street. My hands were shaking. My legs felt like wire pulled too tight. I waited outside for hours. But when I finally went back inside, the hallway was normal again. No door, no extra length, Just the linen closet, no sounds from the wall, no voices. It was like it had never happened, except the wall beneath my headboard, the one that first spoke to me, had a new crack, fresh hairline, and when I leaned close I could hear them breathing. I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't check my email, return any calls, or eat a single thing. I just sat in the kitchen, elbows on the table, listening. At first it was nothing, just the soft hum of the fridge, the occasional tick of the baseboard heater settling. Then, sometime around noon, I heard the footsteps again, faint but deliberate, moving from the living room wall into the kitchen, one after another, heel to toe. Too slow for an animal, too heavy for plumbing. I didn't look up, I just whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. Then, near the ceiling behind me, a soft rasp of fingers dragging across drywall. They stopped directly above me, then a whisper, barely audible but wet and low, "You saw the door." I closed my eyes, breath catching. The voice didn't sound malicious. It didn't sound kind either. It was like hearing someone speak who'd forgotten how. "Who are you?" I asked again. "Before the house, we were alive." I slowly turned in my chair. "The ones they couldn't let go. What does that mean?" I asked. But the voice didn't explain. It only said, "We don't remember our names." I don't know why that sentence hit so hard. Maybe it was the simplicity of it, the childlike confusion buried in their tone. Or maybe it was because, just for a second, I understood. These things, whatever they were, weren't ghosts. Not in the storybook sense. They were fragments, leftovers, stuck in the seams of the house like water trapped in a window pane. But something still didn't make sense. "You asked me to let you out," I said. Silence. "Why me?" A pause. Then from two different points in the wall, one near the pantry, one by the hallway, two voices answered at once. "You listened." I felt that answer in my stomach. I had listened. I hadn't written it off. I hadn't moved out. I hadn't torn the place apart or had it blessed or burned. I had simply heard them, and I think, in whatever fog they were trapped in, that was enough. But now they wanted more. That night I sat in my bedroom with every light off. I didn't record. I didn't even bring my phone. I just sat on the edge of the bed, palms on my knees, and waited. I knew the door would come back, and it did. At 2:09 a.m., the hallway began to stretch again. I didn't see it happen. I just knew. One moment the linen closet was 15 feet away. The next, it was almost 50. And at the end of the hall stood the door, exactly the same as before. Plain wood, no knob, no hinges, just a keyhole. But this time, something was different. I heard humming, a child's tune, drifting out through the keyhole, off-key, repeating the same 3 notes again and again like someone trying to remember the rest of the melody. I stepped into the hallway. The walls felt narrower, like they were breathing in. The farther I walked, the tighter the air got. When I reached the door, the humming stopped. I knelt again and looked through the keyhole. At first, only darkness, then the same eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly, blinking in unison. But they weren't just watching this time. They were waiting. I stood up. My hands trembled. I reached out toward the wood and froze. The door was warm, not like something heated by a vent, but like skin. Like whatever waited on the other side was pressing against it with their palms, their cheeks, their bodies. And I swear, I heard hearts beating. So many hearts. That's when I asked the question I shouldn't have. What will happen if I let you out? The door pulsed once beneath my fingers. From the other side came the smallest, saddest voice I'd ever heard. We don't know. I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I realized I was crying. Something in that voice reminded me of childhood night terrors, of being locked outside in the rain of a place that never had a door to begin with. They weren't lying. They didn't know what they were anymore. They only knew that they were trapped and that I had seen the way in. I pulled my hand back. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Then I turned around and walked back toward the bedroom. Behind me, the door didn't knock. It didn't creak. It simply vanished. I knew it had. I didn't need to turn around to check, but that night as I lay in bed, I heard the breathing again. Different now. Closer. This time, I think it was coming from inside the room. I kept my eyes shut, paralyzed under the weight of something that couldn't be named. And just before sleep finally dragged me under, a single whisper curled against the back of my neck. "You're part of the house now, too." I woke up gasping, the sheets clinging to my skin like wet cloth. It was still dark, just before 5 a.m., but the air in my bedroom felt like it belonged to someplace deeper, older. Stale and warm with the faintest whiff of soil, the kind of scent you'd expect in an old crypt, not a suburban house built in the 50s. I didn't move for a long time. I kept my back flat against the mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening. No breathing, no scratching, no whispers. But something had changed. I knew it even before I got out of bed. The house wasn't waiting anymore. It was watching. When I finally stood, the hardwood creaked under my feet with a new kind of reluctance, like it didn't want me stepping there. The hallway was back to normal length, no hidden door at the end, no extra space. But something felt off, skewed, like the walls had been stretched and poorly stitched back together. That morning, I didn't shower. I didn't make coffee. I didn't brush my teeth. I just walked the perimeter of the house, room by room, opening every closet, checking every wall. I felt like someone trying to prove the earth was still round after seeing it bend. But then I reached the laundry room, and something stopped me cold. The back wall, the one that faced the fence and the pit where the hatch had opened, had changed. There was a new seam in the drywall, a narrow vertical line just wide enough to suggest a panel. It hadn't been there before. I knew every inch of this house, every nail and patch and screw. I'd painted that wall myself 4 summers ago, and now, this. I stepped closer, pressed my ear to the panel. Silence. Then a single knock, so soft it barely qualified as a sound. I stumbled back, hands trembling. My instinct screamed to leave, to get in the car, drive until I ran out of gas. But I couldn't. The thing behind the knock wasn't threatening. It was patient, familiar, like something I'd left unfinished. I didn't open the panel. I didn't even touch it. I backed out of the laundry room and shut the door behind me. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, because this wasn't like the other doors. This one was meant for me. That evening, I tried to distract myself. I put on a movie, poured a drink, played music loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. It didn't matter. The knock came again, this time from the hallway, then from the guest bedroom, then from behind the kitchen cabinets, always the same rhythm. 3 soft knocks, a gentle, persistent question. Will you let us out? I lasted 2 more days like that, pacing, listening, ignoring. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were suffocating. Dirt in my mouth, eyes blinking at me from cracks in the floorboards, whispers dripping from the ceiling like condensation. Then, on the 3rd night, something new happened. I woke up to find the panel in the laundry room wide open, not broken, not smashed, just open. Inside was darkness. Not drywall, not insulation, just a hollow space where no space should have been. And from inside came a voice I hadn't heard before, a man's voice, hoarse, unsteady. I remember my name now. I didn't answer. Do you remember yours? That question struck harder than it should have. I stood frozen, staring into the hollow where the wall had opened. I didn't know what I was looking for. Eyes, maybe, or a hand reaching through. But nothing moved, just the darkness, patient and waiting. I slammed the panel shut and nailed it closed with 6-inch framing nails. Then I dragged the dryer in front of it and pushed a bookshelf into the doorway for good measure. But that night, the knocking didn't stop. It moved through the walls, room to room, always just a few feet behind me, like it was trying to find where I'd gone. I slept on the kitchen floor with the lights on and a hammer in my lap. At 3:33 a.m., The power went out, the light disappeared, and something began to crawl through the ceiling above me. Not walk, crawl, slow, dragging, like someone pulling their body with their arms. I didn't move, not until it stopped directly over me and whispered, "Closer now." Then the knocking started again, not in the walls, under the floorboards, and I finally understood. The house wasn't just keeping them in, it was pulling me down, merging me. Every time I listened, every time I stared too long into the dark spaces between the studs and joists, I was giving it something: attention, acknowledgement, permission, and now it wanted the rest of me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because I woke up the next morning sprawled on the kitchen floor with dirt under my fingernails and blood in my mouth like I'd bitten my tongue. The power was back on, but every wall in the house had a new crack in it. Thin hairline. But when I pressed my ear to them, I didn't hear breathing anymore. I heard digging. I spent the next day sitting on the front porch, the sun baking into my skin, trying to pretend the house behind me didn't exist. I stared at the empty street, at the cracked sidewalk, at the half-dead oak tree in my yard that hadn't dropped a single leaf all summer. I watched ants crawl in and out of a crack in the porch steps, and for a while that was enough. Something small, something that obeyed rules. But even outside I could feel the digging. It vibrated up through the porch planks like distant thunder, steady and patient. It wasn't frantic, it was methodical, calculated. Like something was clearing space, making room. For what, I didn't know, but I knew who it was for. That night I drove to a hardware store and bought a sledgehammer. I wasn't running anymore. If the house wanted something, it could damn well show me its face. I started in the bedroom, that first wall, the one that thudded behind the headboard. I swung hard, harder than I should have, until the drywall cracked open like a shell. Dust filled my throat. I coughed, blinking through the cloud, expecting to see insulation or studs or mouse nests. But what I saw instead was space, not just a wall cavity, a hallway, a real hallway, 5 feet wide, lined with old wooden paneling, warped and stained. The walls curved slightly, like the entire thing had been built by someone who didn't fully understand straight lines. And it stretched deep, farther than the limits of my house should have allowed. I dropped the sledgehammer and ran back into the hallway, then the laundry room. Tore open that panel again, ripped the nails free, pushed the dryer aside, and found the same thing waiting. Another hallway, different angles, same impossible size. I went room by room, smashing through drywall, pushing aside appliances, knocking holes in closets. Every time I uncovered more of it, more hallways, more walls within walls, passages between the walls of my house, carved not for pipes or wiring, but for movement, for people. By 3 a.m. I was standing in the living room, surrounded by holes. The house looked like it had been gutted by termites. Every wall bled dust and splinters. Every cavity whispered with air that didn't belong. And all of it led somewhere I couldn't see. Then I heard the knock again, not behind me, not above or below, in front. I turned. There, where the fireplace used to be, stood a door, just like the others. Plain wood, no knob, just a keyhole. But this time, there was something else, a key. It hung on a nail above the frame, swaying gently as if freshly placed. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it hadn't been there. Maybe the house was showing it to me now because I'd earned it, because I'd torn enough of myself away. I reached up and took it. It was warm, too warm, and when I slid it into the keyhole, it turned effortlessly. The door swung open. There was no wind, no creak, just stillness and the sharp, instant drop of temperature like I'd stepped into a freezer. Inside, darkness, not empty, but crowded. Lining the walls of the narrow space were figures. Human figures, not moving, not speaking, just standing shoulder to shoulder, back to back, facing the walls like children put in time out. I stepped inside. My flashlight flickered. I smacked it. The beam returned. They were people, or they had been once, thin, desiccated, mouths open as if mid-scream, but no sound came. Their eyes were sealed shut, not sewn, just closed, lids wrinkled like old paper. Some stood with hands outstretched, palms pressed against the walls. Others knelt, faces buried in the corners. I walked past them, slowly, unable to stop. They didn't move, they didn't breathe, but I felt them. I felt them under the floor, above the ceiling, tucked in every wall and beam and plank. I understood then what the house had done, what it had always done. It was never about haunting, it was about keeping, preserving, not ghosts, not echoes. People who had heard the knocking, people who had listened too long, people who had asked one question too many, stepped through one door too deep, looked through one keyhole for just a second longer than they should have. And the house had taken them. It hadn't killed them. It had absorbed them. I turned around to run. The door was gone. I slammed my fists against the wall, screamed, kicked, but the house didn't answer. The house had what it wanted, except behind me something moved. A figure had turned. Its eyes were open, wide, bloodshot, fixed on me, its lips parted. "You can take our place." I backed into the wall, heart pounding, throat raw. The others turned too, all of them. Dozens of eyes, hundreds, all blind, all staring. They began to whisper in unison, voices overlapping, growing louder. "Let us out, let us out, let us out." The flashlight slipped from my fingers. Darkness swallowed everything. I don't remember how I got out. I must have passed out. My last memory was of the figures whispering, their mouths widening in unison until their voices became a single guttural noise. Not human, not words, just need. The weight of it pressed into my skull like hands trying to pry open my thoughts. When I woke, I was on the floor of my living room. The door was gone again. So were the holes I'd smashed into the walls. Every surface was intact, freshly painted. No dust, no debris. No signs I'd torn the house apart with a sledgehammer just hours before. My knuckles were raw. My shirt was soaked through with sweat and dirt. But the house was untouched, pristine. Like it had decided to forget. Except for one thing, the key. It sat on the coffee table, glinting in the morning light, polished, clean, waiting. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look at it too long. I left the house. I didn't pack, didn't grab clothes or money or food. I just walked out the front door and kept going until my legs gave out. Then I found a gas station with a payphone, called a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years, and asked if I could stay the night. He didn't ask questions. I think he heard it in my voice. I didn't tell him where I'd been or what I'd seen. I slept on his couch with every light on and a kitchen knife under the pillow. That night, nothing knocked, nothing whispered. It was the best sleep I'd had in weeks, but when I woke up, the key was in my pocket. I didn't put it there. I hadn't touched it. I stared at it for a long time, sitting in the driveway, wondering what would happen if I threw it away. Dropped it down a storm drain. Smashed it to pieces. But something told me it wouldn't matter. The house knew me now. It had chosen me, and I had chosen it back, without meaning to. I had listened, asked questions. I'd looked through the keyhole. I had given it permission. I tried to return to normal life, moved in with my cousin across the state, got a job in a warehouse, worked third shift so I'd be too tired to think. But the knocking followed me, first faint, distant, then closer. One night, I heard it through the walls of the trailer I was staying in. I pressed my ear against the bedroom paneling and heard the voice again, the same one from the house. "Do you remember your name now?" I screamed. I punched the wall so hard my knuckles split, but there was no blood on the wall, just a crack. Thin hairline, exactly like the ones that had started to appear back in the house. Over the next week, the cracks multiplied, not just in the trailer walls, in my skin, the corners of my eyes, my lips. I bled when I smiled. My reflection blurred in glass, not like something was wrong with the mirror, but like I was going soft around the edges, like something was pulling me out of focus. The people I worked with started to notice. I stopped being invited to lunch. One of them asked nervously if I was feeling okay. I told her I didn't know. She didn't talk to me again. Then the dreams came back. Every night I'd see the door, not behind drywall now, but standing in the middle of a field or inside the break room or floating above my bed like a noose made of wood. And the whisper would return, more confident now. You know where we are. One night I woke up in the hallway of my cousin's house, standing, barefoot, staring at the plaster. My palm was pressed flat against the wall, knocking. I was knocking. I don't remember getting there. I don't remember dreaming, but my hand was bleeding, and I swear. The wall was warm. I left the next day, drove 8 hours through the night, back to the house I'd tried to forget. It was waiting for me. The porch light was on, even though I'd never set it to automatic. The lawn was mowed, the hedge trimmed, but the front door was open, just a crack, just enough. I stepped inside. The air was still, heavy, a little colder than I remembered. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, not as it had looked after I tore it apart, but as if none of that had ever happened, like the house had erased it, like it had reset. I stepped deeper inside. My shoes made no sound on the floor. The house exhaled. I felt it in my chest, a long, slow breath that wasn't mine. And then I heard it, scraping, digging, closer. This time, it wasn't under the floor. It was inside the walls. I turned slowly. A new crack had formed just beside the fireplace, wider than the others, and from within it, something blinked. I didn't blink back. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the crack in the wall beside the fireplace where something alive, aware, had just blinked from the darkness within. Not an eye like ours. It was black and wet and round, reflecting the dim room in its curve like a drop of oil. And it didn't look away. It stared with a patience that made my skin crawl. It had no urgency, no fear. It was already home. I took a single step back. The crack widened. Not fast, not jagged and violent like splitting wood, but smoothly, deliberately, like the house was unfolding itself, stretching, welcoming. And inside that widening seam, behind the lath and layers of old plaster, I saw what could only be described as architecture. Rooms beyond rooms, tunnels looping into shadow, corners bent at impossible angles like a labyrinth that had grown upside down and inward. I wasn't looking into a wall anymore. I was looking into the houses inside, the real one, and it wasn't empty. The blink came again, lower this time. The shape of a crouched figure shifted behind the open seam, just out of reach, partially obscured. Then another form stirred farther back, shoulders, hands, pale, slick skin stretching over limbs bent wrong, fingers too long and slow in their movement, dragging across wooden slats like they were testing their grip. I stepped back again, hit the edge of the coffee table with my knee. The key, still on the table where I'd left it, tipped and rolled to the floor. It stopped between my feet. I stared at it. It stared back. That's when I heard the first voice again. Not a whisper this time, not muffled. It came clear and flat from every wall at once. Why do you keep leaving? I opened my mouth, but no words came. You saw us. You know now. You belong. Then something moved within the walls, so fast and heavy it shook the picture frames. A slam above the ceiling, a scuttling in the floor, dozens of them, not rats, not animals, them, all of them. I ran. Out the front door, barefoot, not bothering to grab the key, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was 5 blocks down, crouched behind a dumpster behind an abandoned grocery store, panting, palms shaking. And the worst part? The house wasn't chasing me, but its echo was. That night, while trying to sleep in a 24-hour laundromat with buzzing fluorescent lights and a vending machine humming behind me, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, It came from inside my head, not a headache, not imagination. It was real, physical sound, somehow locked inside my skull, like my bones were becoming walls, and whatever was digging through the house had found a new blueprint. I vomited in the bathroom and didn't stop until I was dry heaving, forehead against the sink. When I lifted my head, the mirror was fogged, even though the air was cold. And in that fog, words were written. Where will you go that doesn't have walls? I didn't answer. I didn't scream. I just left. I walked the city all night, hallucinating the sound of tapping behind brick walls and apartment siding. I saw flickers of movement in alleyway vents, heard breathing through drainage grates. Even when I pressed my hands over my ears, it didn't stop, because the house wasn't a structure anymore. It was a place inside me. And then, the next night, I understood the final truth. I woke in a borrowed bed in a friend's spare room, and the first thing I saw was the corner where the wall met the ceiling. The drywall there was bulging, just slightly, like someone behind it was pushing their face forward. I stared for hours, afraid to move. Every so often, the shape would retreat, then return, pressing closer, testing the boundary, and then I heard my voice, exactly my voice. From inside the wall, I think I'm ready to come home now. I screamed. I tore the drywall open with a wrench I found under the sink. There was no one inside, just darkness, just more space. I ran. I didn't even lock the door behind me. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter anymore, because wherever I go, the house follows, not as a building, as possibility, as layout, as walls that remember how it feels to contain someone. And they want me to knock back, to let them out, to finally say yes. And I'm afraid that one day soon, I will. I haven't slept in 2 days. I don't mean I've just been tossing and turning. I mean my body won't let me. Every time my eyes begin to close, something happens. A knock from the ceiling, a whisper from the sink, a shape in the drywall that isn't quite there. I blink and it's gone, but the fear remains, and not the sharp, sudden kind. This is worse. This is slow. A kind of fear that lives in my blood now. Last night I holed up in an abandoned roadside motel. Not one of the modern ones with digital locks and deadbolt chains. This place had skeleton keyholes, wood paneling from the 70s, and stains on the carpet that looked like old rust. I chose it because it felt dead, forgotten. Maybe that meant the house couldn't find me here for a few hours. I thought it had worked. I sat in the corner of the room with my back to the wall, knees to my chest, flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, waiting. Nothing happened. The silence wasn't normal silence. It was thick, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the doorknob turned. Slowly. It clicked once, then again. But the door didn't open, because I'd wedged the dresser against it. I got to my feet and stood perfectly still. The knob stopped turning, and then I heard it. Knock, 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 not at the door, behind me, in the wall. I spun around. There on the far wall, one that should have faced the parking lot, was a fresh seam. Smooth, pale, out of place. It pulsed once, a breath, no other word for it. And then I heard my voice again, but not exactly mine, softer, slower, like someone trying to learn how to speak through my tongue. You opened it. I said nothing. You made space. A shape pressed against the wall, shoulder, then an arm, then something long and thin and wrong. It receded. Then something else leaned forward, as if crouching just out of sight. I could see the drywall flexing as it shifted weight. Quiet, curious. We want to remember what it's like. What's like? I whispered. Silence. Then, from every wall in the room at once, being outside, I fell to my knees, not in surrender, in exhaustion. I didn't have anything left. No more houses to hide in. No more places the house couldn't find, because it wasn't in one place anymore. It was in me. That's what it had been doing all along. Not trying to escape, trying to share, trying to grow. Every whisper I listened to, every time I asked questions, every moment I stared too long into the dark, I had let it in. And now it used me to keep growing. When I close my eyes, I see floor plans that don't make sense, hallways that turn into themselves, walls that breathe like lungs, and doors, always doors, with no knobs and keyholes shaped like my eye. I ran again after that night. I keep moving. Bus stations, public libraries, parks where the wind is loud enough to cover the sound of scratching. But I know it's not enough, because the world has walls everywhere, and the house is patient. It doesn't need to chase me. It only needs me to stop running. To find a quiet room, sit down, and listen. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, I'll hear that knock again. 3 slow taps from the inside of a wall I thought was safe, and I'll reach out without thinking. I'll touch it, and it will whisper, "There you are," and the house will open its door again. Only this time, I won't leave, because you can only run from yourself for so long, and when that day comes, I'll be the one knocking.